Our Clean Energy Department has been around for a little over 6 years, and we work in a number of areas, including solar. So we work with cities and towns to help municipalities to move forward on solar, as well as to help all community members take advantage of solar technologies. We work also in many other areas of clean energy, energy efficiency, other forms of renewable energy, EVs, hybrid conversions, energy resiliency. We like to work with our communities collectively when we can find economies of scale and work on knowledge sharing. We also like to work one-on-one with our communities to help with capacity building, plug cities and towns into state and federal and regional and utility programs, provide technical assistance and outreach programming and education. So if you have any questions on ways that we work with cities and towns, or if there are programs that you're interested in learning more about, please feel free to contact us after this webinar. Now it's poll time, so I'll turn it over to my colleague, Meg Aki.
Great. Yeah, so before we got started and dived into kind of what community shared solar is and how you might be able to implement it in your community, we wanted to get a sense of who we have on this webinar today. So we have 3 quick questions just about what your role and place of work is, what kind of electric service provider your city or town has, whether this is an investor-owned utility or municipal light plant. And then we wanted to get a sense of how familiar you feel you are with community shared solar. So I'm going to launch this now. And then if you just put in your answers, and I'll give you guys a minute to respond. All right, just a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. So submit your answers if you haven't already. All right. Okay, so I'm going to share these results with you guys. Great, so it looks like we have a pretty diverse range of people that have called in, from municipalities to solar contractors, state government, financiers, a lot of people from nonprofits or volunteers or the other category. Most folks are in the investor-owned utility service territory for their electric service. And about half of you have said, or more than half of you said that you're moderately familiar with community shared solar, understanding the basic model. So hopefully we can provide you some more insight onto kind of the specifics and how the current policy landscape is going to potentially affect community shared solar. Great, so thank you so much for participating. And I'm going to hand it off now to folks at Cadmus to talk about community shared solar.
Thanks, Megan and Cami, for hosting the webinar today, and also all the great work you guys do in hosting this series of solar webinars. And to everyone on the phone, my name is Greg Hall. I'm a renewable energy analyst at the Cadmus Group. Cadmus Group is a consulting firm with practices in water, homeland security, clean air, and distributed energy resources. As a renewable energy analyst, I work a lot in the Northeast on solar policy and economics, and especially how it affects municipal solar development. As such, I've worked with a number of attendants on the phone, as well as our other presenters over in Newton, on developing solar projects on public land, parking lots, and rooftops. And my colleague, Dave Beavers, who has extensive experience in the Massachusetts solar market, joins me today, and he and I will be happy to answer any questions you have during the Q&A session following up on our presentation. So during the next half of the presentation, Andy Savitz over at Newton is going to walk you through expanding solar access to low to moderate income communities. But before diving into that topic, I just want to work through some of the basics of community shared solar and the specific opportunities and challenges we face in Massachusetts. Based on the results of the poll, it sounds like many of you have a decent understanding already, but it never hurts to review some of the basics so that we're all on firm ground as we dive into a more specific case study. I'll try to touch in broad strokes project ownership, the value proposition to both the development community and municipal and community participants, and then place community shared solar in the broader Massachusetts policy context. So just before we start, I did want to establish a framework that the models and some of the context we'll discuss during this presentation are only applicable to investor-owned utilities. In Massachusetts, the investor-owned utilities are National Grid Nantucket, Eversource Western Mass, which used to be known as WMECO, and Unitil. Community shared solar is possible in municipal light plants, but it requires a very different approach and a more individual approach based on the regs in each MLP. Since these projects are facing a more aggressive timeline with the SREC sunset, it's inherent that you move quickly, and we'll touch a little bit on that towards the end of the presentation. Finally, to nail down some terminology, the term community shared solar is fairly unique to Massachusetts, as other states refer to that type of project as just community solar, shared solar, or even solar gardens. I'll likely float between the terms, so bear with me. Hopefully that clears up any confusion. And again, just to reiterate, happy to answer any follow-up questions. We're not going to touch on everything since community shared solar is fairly involved, but we're more than happy to answer your questions during the Q&A. So community shared solar, in general, takes the traditional benefits of PV, distributed photovoltaics, or solar PV, and distributes them amongst a wider pool of participants. In Massachusetts, this is accomplished through the distribution of virtual net metering credits. The availability of virtual net metering is critical to some of the traditional forms of shared solar we see here in Massachusetts. And just as a visual, a larger system will sell all of the production or send all of the production to the grid and accrue a bank of credits. Those credits can then be distributed remotely within that utility's load zone to a variety of participants. This is important because the benefit of solar often shows up on your utility bill in the form of credits rather than power, and the community shared solar model allows you to extend those benefits over a wide variety of people. Currently in Massachusetts, there's over 445 megawatts worth of community shared solar that have qualified under the Massachusetts Solar Carve-Out, which impressively represents 23.2% of qualified capacity. So this model figures to play a large role in solar in Massachusetts moving forward. The reason I think many people are so interested in community shared solar is that it presents an opportunity to expand the access to distributed solar generation to a wider pool of participants. While access to solar has grown dramatically in the Commonwealth in recent years, there remain segments of the citizenry that are unable to avail themselves of the technology. Examples of this are multifamily homes, low to moderate income, and renters. The reason for this, in many cases, is regulatory. There are fairly strict regulations concerning the amount of solar projects that can be developed on a single parcel. In many cases, subscription to community shared solar is restricted to folks with credit scores on the higher end, and renters who move around a lot. Normally, there are significant barriers to investing in solar if you're only going to be located at a certain residence for, a year or two. In addition to the regulatory barriers, there are a host of socioeconomic reasons why solar access has been limited to certain segments of the population, but there's also a far less subtle reason, and that is shade. According to the National Renewable Energy Lab, nearly half of U.S. homes are unsuitable for a fairly small 1.5 kilowatt system. And in our experience in eastern Massachusetts, where I imagine many of you are located, that estimate could be as low as 20% for homes that are suitable for solar. And this would be due to trees, roof conditions, roof age, or orientation. That leaves 4/5 of the population unable to buy in or invest in solar, or at least in the traditional model. Community shared solar offers the development community a gateway to a completely untapped market for, of residents and other participants. From a municipal perspective, shared solar can be used as a tool to ease the energy burden on low to moderate income residents, and we should be able to see a case study of this later in the presentation. When it comes to ownership, and many of you will be familiar with this, the majority of solar and community shared solar is third-party owned. The principal reason for this is that private entities are able to monetize the 30% federal investment tax credit, known as the ITC, and thus are able to offer a higher return and take advantage of more cost-competitive credit. In addition to the incentive, community shared solar poses some more specific administrative challenges, and in many cases, the development community and the private industry provide software solutions and customer-friendly portals with which participants interact and track their savings. However, that's not to say that we don't see participant-owned community shared solar. We have seen participants pool capital up front and select a contractor on their own. There are more complexities, however, with projects of this nature, as the upfront capital investment is substantial, and it's important to consider some of the hurdles with the Security and Exchange Commission's perspective on how to distribute benefit and how those are treated. In general, however, the development community sees somewhere between 10 to 15% internal rate of return, and at CADMIS, when we gauge project feasibility, we tend to track incentives in site location and see if they can land in that zone, since that's really what the development community will expect if you're looking to initiate a project of this nature. So just to summarize the big picture, community shared solar is an elegant way to extend benefits through a subscription or other model that allows participants discounted energy from a local sustainable source. Typically, these projects are more visible than traditional on-site solar, and as they involve more members of your community, they can be quite valuable to a local initiative to bring greener energy to a larger segment of the populace. It's also quite simple. In many cases, with net metering, the credits appear on the bill, and folks can track their progress against local energy goals or just their residential savings in an easy-to-use online portal. It's not all great news, though, because as many of you know, Massachusetts and its regulatory landscape can cause quite a bit of industry uncertainty. And just now, the SREC 2 program, the Solar Renewable Energy Certificate Program, which was so instrumental in growing solar in Massachusetts, is sunsetting and will only be available until March 31st, 2018. This means the project seeking eligibility must be mechanically complete by that date. And as community shared solar has a slightly longer development timeline than some other solar projects due to financing hurdles and subscription delay, most likely projects being initiated in the next few months will need to look towards the next incentive program known as SMART. This is something quite common to Massachusetts, as many times when a project is initiated, the regulatory future can be a little bit murky, and unfortunately, we're in a similar situation right now. A little bit about SMART. SMART is the Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target. It's a program that takes much of the rationale of the solar carve-out and seeks to bring down ratepayer impact, but still provide 10 to 20-year fixed price terms and long-run revenue stability to solar development. In general, and I'm happy to get into this in the Q&A session because I know that there have been a lot of questions on what SMART will look like, but the program in general gives you a base rate of, say, 15 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on the capacity of a system. And then depending on the configuration or the offtake profile of the system, you would be eligible for adders. CSS itself is eligible for between 5 and 6 cents kilowatt hour or dollars per kilowatt hour, and low income should be eligible for a more valuable adder. As always, this comes with a slight qualification that these values are based on DOER's recent proposal and are subject to change before they release their emergency regulations. Here's just a simple illustration of what CSS should look like under SMART compared to what we saw during the solar carve-out and SREC program. In blue, you see the revenue proposition for the SREC and the old regime, and in red, you should see the more stable revenue source presented by DOER for the SMART program. As you can see, SMART offers more price certainty and revenue stability, but it also tends, at least in Eversource territory, which we've tracked here, to offer more long-run benefit, even though in the first 10 or so years of the project, it offers less than under the solar carve-out. This figure is representative of a smaller, a system on the smaller end in Eversource territory, but we like to think that this illustration does hold true for different size systems in some of our IOUs. In addition to some of the regulatory uncertainty, there are some more specific challenges to CSS as they relate to net metering and other regulation. Communities in National Grid territory may be aware that right now there is no net metering available, as the net metering caps have been fully subscribed for some time now, and there isn't a concrete proposal out there, or at least concrete evidence that the legislature will choose to raise the caps. An option for those community members or decision makers in National Grid is to look for currently installed shared solar, as they may have capacity available for subscription or may offer waiting lists for new participants. Under SMART, there is a proposed option for on-bill crediting, which may allow CSS to function even without net metering availability. In NSTAR, there is net metering capacity available. However, projects at the moment will only receive 60% of the retail rate, which render the economics of shared solar slightly marginal. and likely those projects would need more space in terms of acreage. So something that, and that's obviously something that urban areas and many of MAPC's member communities don't have. However, on the fortunate end, by all accounts, SMART could present better economics than the current regime, and some municipalities are using public land, as we'll see in a moment, to host projects of this nature, especially in order to extend benefits to low to moderate income. As I mentioned earlier about municipal light plants, they can establish their own policies, but we urge them to be careful in developing terms of energy supply contracts. And the best economics will likely be with SRECs, as currently MLPs are allowed to participate in the SREC program, but are not automatically eligible under the SMART program. As the SREC 2 program ends next year, it's imperative that you move very quickly. And again, that's something we can dive into a little bit more during the Q&A. I've included a couple of resources here, and as these slides will be distributed after the presentation, if you're looking for more information on community shared solar, Dave and I are both happy to answer your questions, but these are also good resources for your own reference if you're looking to distribute some literature on the projects of this nature to folks on your team. I think I'm now going to hand this over to our friends in Newton. Thanks everyone for the time.
Hi everyone.
Go ahead.
You want to do a very powerful introduction for me, or shall I just launch in? I think I'll just launch in.
Yeah, you can just launch in.
Okay, great. This is Andy Savitz. I'm the Sustainability Director for the City of Newton, and I'm joined today by Bill Ferguson, who's our Energy Project Manager, who had a lot to do with getting this project going. Can we flip the slide, please? Newton's in the process of developing a number of sites around the city for solar power. We're in the second phase of our three-phase project to do this. And this that you're seeing here is one of 9 sites that's being developed in phase 2. It's a former it's a DPW parking lot. I sort of object to the term on-the-ground project because, as you can see, this is actually an up-in-the-air project. It's a carport, one of 2 that we've got now in the city, and it's generating about, I believe, 650 kilowatts of solar power. Let me just cut to the chase. What we're doing with this installation is we are providing about $45,000 to $60,000 worth of net metering credits to 900 or so low-income households in the city. So in essence, the city is foregoing about $45,000 worth of credits and is distributing those. So could I get the next slide, please? So the project has been a partnership between the City of Newton, Eversource, and ABCD, which is the quasi-governmental agency that helps distribute energy benefits to low-income residents around the city of Boston. And I don't think we could have accomplished this, without this sort of 3-part partnership. One of the first problems we faced was, who are the low-income households in the city, and how do we reach them? We decided to make this program. We didn't want to get into the business of deciding who would qualify for the program. So we made an early decision that if you were a resident that had already qualified for the low-income rate at Eversource, that you were automatically qualified for our program, and you would need to opt out if you didn't want to get the additional financial benefit of the net metering credits. There are some fairly strict privacy issues related to who and who isn't on the low income rate, and we didn't want to even know. So what we did was we arranged for ABCD, who administers the R2 program for Eversource, to send a letter from the mayor to about 1,200 households that were already on the rate. And the letter basically said, if you don't respond to this letter within 30 or 60 days, I can't remember, Bill, but then you're automatically going to start getting this benefit. If you don't opt out, then you are giving the city permission to know your name and address. So this was how we sort of handled the privacy issue. At the end of the day, we didn't want that information and we didn't need it, so we still don't have it. But what it enabled us to do was to identify the eligible residents and to get their account numbers. And it turned out that we thought we had about 1,200 eligible households. It got whittled down for various reasons to 903, which is the number of households we had left after the opt-out period. So once the opt-out period closed, ABCD sent us a list of 903 accounts, completely anonymous. All we had were the account numbers. And we put them on what's called a Schedule Z. Some of you are probably familiar with this, but Massachusetts allows for virtual net metering, where if you're generating solar power, you're allowed to distribute the net metering credits to anyone you want simply by filling out a form. One of the beauties of this program turned out to be that we didn't have to change any regulations or even bend any regulations, because with virtual net metering, everything was already in place to allow us to do this. We just took the Schedule Z concept and broadened it. I think it's fair to say that when virtual net metering was first sort of passed, it was going to be, I don't think Eversource realized that they were one day going to get a list with 903 accounts on it, but they were very cooperative with us in putting this together for the first time, and after a couple of meetings, they figured out how to do it. So we put all these accounts on a Schedule Z, and Eversource allocates the credits every month based on the amount of electricity that is generated. So obviously lower in the winter months and more in the summer. We estimate that each household will get something around $50 a month. I'm sorry, $50 a year in credits, which may seem like a small number, but John Drew, the president of ABCD, reminded us that a lot of these people are living on Social Security, and in 2017, that benefit is likely to go up by $4 for the whole year. So $50 is a fairly significant discount if you're paying, $200 a month on electric bills. So we were very happy, and there's a slide in here, to see the first bills that went out in March. I think we turned the switch on the facility in around the first or second week of January, Bill?
Late January.
Late January, and the first round of bills have gone out. I'm sorry, the second, with the net metering credits identified on the bill, and the first couple of bills had an insert that explained the program, provided numbers for people to call if they had questions about it. So we're actually now doing this. We are in a position to update the Schedule Z twice a year. And we've worked it out so that if people leave the program for whatever reason, the low-income residents, we have a way of replacing those. ABCD will identify new people that come onto the program, and every 6 months we'll take out the old ones. Well, actually, the old ones get taken off automatically. The credits revert to us for a very short period of time, and then we reallocate them every 6 months. So I'll just say one more thing about the benefits of this approach. and then I'm going to ask Bill to talk through the slide that discusses a little bit more about the finances. But one of the benefits is this program is incredibly simple to administer. It took us a year to figure it out, but we now realize that this can be done in a very short period of time. It is completely within the regulations. We've established it as a precedent, so any community that wants to get their low-income folks in on the solar benefits can set this up very quickly. We're also now starting to have discussions with local houses of worship that are putting solar panels up or have them already to contribute into the program. I mean, they're perfectly free to send out credits where they want, but we're encouraging them to use our list of 903 residents so that we can increase the benefit. We've had some discussions with some of the large, big brand box stores in Newton on Route 9. You've seen the malls. And one of them is quite interested in contributing credits, and we've got some of the academic institutions interested in this as well. So let me ask for a slide switch and ask Bill to run through the numbers very quickly. The bottom line here is he figured out a way to make this array sort of self-financing, so it more or less runs at a break-even point. But Bill, why don't you talk through this one?
Yeah, hi. From the project that was shown on the first slide at our DPW facility, we generate approximately 660,000 kilowatt hours a year. And what we do is we purchase roughly $160,000 of net metering credits. Of that $160,000, $60,000 worth of it goes to the low-income families, and $100,000 of it is kept by the city. The amount that is kept by the city covers the cost of the net metering credits that we purchase through our purchase power agreement with Amoresco. So, in other words, the city comes out slightly in the black and is able to provide benefits to low-income accounts in the city. We ended up, as Andy mentioned, serving 903 low-income accounts, and the benefit to each household of that was approximately $50 per year. So it's pretty simple. The Z agreement makes it very simple because all we have to do at our end is fill out the Z agreement where we keep, roughly 70% of the net metering credits, and the balance is distributed to the low-income households for their subsidy under the program. That makes it very easy. It's important to make it easy. I think there are two aspects of what makes it easy. As Andy mentioned, working through ABCD, they pre-qualify everybody. You know who is eligible for the program by simply piggybacking on the ABCD program and the Eversource R2 rate, and also having the willingness to donate the low-income credits to the net metering credits, rather, to the low-income customers. Those two things is what make it easy. If you're not willing to donate the credits, then it becomes a little more complicated and kind of falls more under that community shared solar type model that was described previously, that has some extra steps to it and some extra administrative burden to it. There's very little administrative burden to this program the way we've implemented it.
I just want to reiterate that we think we've got this down to the point, we're new into this, obviously, but I think Bill's correct that we figured out a way to do this in a very streamlined fashion. The participation of ABCD is critical to getting your program off the ground, and John Wells, who's our partner over there, has very graciously volunteered to work with any city or town within the metro region and to find his counterpart agencies out in the western part of the state or wherever your community may happen to be to help you explain the program to those anti-poverty agencies and to get you up and running with them. So this is obviously not the only model for sharing the benefits of solar power with low-income ratepayers, but it's a pretty easy one. It gets them into the solar game in a way. We plan to do some outreach later on in the program, and we're very interested in trying to work with other vendors who are working on ways to commercialize the program so that it transitions possibly from a donation program into some sort of shared financing model. But that's for next week. So I think I'll end it there and turn it back over to our friends at MAP. Oh, I'm sorry, one last, can I go back? I forgot I had one last slide. So here's the actual bill. This is a redacted bill, which we got pretty excited about when we first saw it. You can see, it's a little hard to read, but facing the screen in the lower right, you see the net metering credit, which I think for this month was $1.08. In the first set of bills, it was $3. It depends on the amount of power that's being generated, but we're pretty certain that over the course of the year, it'll work out to between $50 and $60 per household. So it's really working. Okay, now I'll stop. I hope I wasn't on mute that whole time.
No, you were, Andy. We could hear you just fine. Thank you so much for going through your, sharing with us the model that you guys have implemented so successfully. So now we're going to dive into the Q&A. I've already had a couple of questions come in, but if you have anything from the earlier presentation on broadly community shared solar or specifically for Newton on their model and how they implemented that, just type it into the Q&A box and we'll try our best to answer as many questions as we can in the next 19 minutes. So one of the first questions that we had specifically for Newton was just, did Newton consider buying the solar panels outright as opposed to signing a PPA contract with Ameresco? What were kind of the considerations in going that route?
We did, but because of the federal tax credit has such an impact on the economics of these projects, we decided to go with a private developer and a purchase power agreement route. The city wouldn't be eligible for that 30% tax credit, and that would impact the economics. And also the purchase power agreement has some other advantages. Basically, it's turnkey. They do all the design and construction, and they're also completely responsible for maintenance and operations over the 20-year term of the contract.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense from a highest and best use for cities to do this on their own because they lose out on a major financial benefit, which is the tax credit.
And Chad, do you have anything you want to add on kind of other approaches to solar for municipalities?
I would reiterate that, what we've seen is definitely because the private industry and the private development community can monetize that 30% tax credit, the city's looking at cheaper power that they can then pass on in the form of savings. I would second exactly what Bill and Andy said.
Great. And then we have another question more broadly about community shared solar. And Someone was wondering what the relationship between a community shared solar project and a solar project for a condominium might be.
This is Dave Evers. I'll take it. There's two answers. One is the kind of common sense idea that community shared solar, you think of the solar out in the field and serving residences that can't have solar because of shading and whatnot. Because of the certain way that we have virtual net metering that Andy talked about here, and some other DPU rules that apply, you'll basically get the same model at condos, and you might see them as effectively community shared solar models because they're using virtual net metering. What might be unique in a condo situation is you might have private investors. The condo folks might go together and purchase the PV panels, whereas Andy and Bill said in a municipality sense, that ownership model is a lot more difficult to digest.
Great. And then some more specific questions about City of Newton's project have come in. Someone was wondering, how important is it for this model to work for the city and town to receive a portion of the net metering credits? And also on the other end, is there any way that you're tracking kind of Eversource's distribution of the net metering credits to the 900 accounts that are opted into or did not opt out of the program?
Let me take the first half, and I'll ask Bill to take the second half. It's pretty important, I think, it was for us that the net metering credits that we gave away were a relatively small proportion of the total net metering credits that the city is generating for its own financial benefit. We're not giving away, I don't know, is it 5% of our net metering credits? It's a small percentage.
It's about 30% that we give away.
30% of that project.
Of that project.
Right, but in the context of our overall
13
13 projects and another 20 to come, it's a very small percentage. And $45,000 it's money, but it's a rounding error in terms of a $350 million budget compared to the good we could do for a small number of less fortunate residents in the city. What I thought was brilliant about what Bill did with the numbers on this one project is he figured out how to run it at a break-even basis. In other words, we're paying $100,000 for $160,000 worth of net metering credits, and we're giving away the $60,000 profit, if you will, from this one project. But we're not losing any money at the project. We divided the credits so that we break even on this one array. And I think that was a pretty good selling point, too. Bill, do you want to answer the question about tracking?
Yeah, as far as tracking, we get, every month, we get from Eversource what's called a special ledger bill, which is a statement that explains how many net metering credits you got and what the value was and how they were distributed between the city and the low-income customers. So we get a monthly statement on that from Eversource, which you get for any project of this nature. So this isn't anything unusual either. It's all part of something that is routinely done by Eversource for any net metering project. And we get the same kind of statements for all of our other 11 projects that we have in the city.
And one other point about this is all the 903 families get the same percentage of the net metering credits. So no matter whether you've got a big bill or a small bill, relatively speaking, you're getting, for example, 0.03% of the total of the net metering credits. So that makes it very simple as well.
Great. Thank you. And one other question has come in about kind of your partnership with ABCD. Someone asked, how are they getting kind of paid for administering that component of the program that you spoke to about the outreach and updating the list twice a year? If you could talk a little bit more about that partnership that you guys have developed.
Well, they're not getting paid. They see this as right in the wheelhouse of why they exist. So they were very excited when we approached them with this idea, and they spent a lot of time helping us figure out how to do it. We couldn't have done it without them because they have a very, very good relationship with Eversource. And although I have my issues with Eversource, they're very good when it comes to helping people in need. So we leverage their relationship. And now that we've got this figured out, again, as Bill said, this is a very small effort that needs to be, incremental effort that needs to be made to keep this program going. All of the information is sort of generated in the regular course of business. The only slight complication is as people drop off the program and come into the program, there's got to be some kind of accounting there. But the information all comes from Eversource, and it goes back to Eversource. So it's pretty easy. We don't pay them, and they've never even thought about asking for any money. And now the effort is to the point where you don't need money to make this thing go. Bill and I are going to carve out a couple of hours a month or whatever it takes, and we're not asking for extra money either, since we wouldn't get it.
I would add to that ABCD already gets this information on the R2 rate payers, so it's not some new information they need to obtain. They already get it, and they already use it as a eligibility requirement for other programs that they run out of their agency. So it's kind of an incremental effort for them to help us address our program with that same list.
Right, that's great. And then this is a question that's come in for Cadmus. Since we're talking now about a model where, there's no ownership of the low-income residents for the actual solar project, do you have any thoughts on a community shared solar project where the LMI customers actually own a portion of the system and receive potentially greater financial benefits?
I don't know of any examples of that. Part of the reason that shared solar is so interesting is that, in the past, there hasn't been a lot of direct ownership, period, for residential solar. That's changing slowly as there's been a sort of a collective realization that the economics are a lot better if you own a system outright, just if it's installed on your roof. But it can be very challenging for LMI communities to be able to raise the necessary capital or receive credit at the project initiation phase. So it's certainly possible, much like some of the projects we've seen that are participant-owned. This is just an avenue for folks who don't have the requisite credit score or don't have the requisite credit history to receive upfront capital or capital at a reasonable rate. This is sort of a way to open up that market.
Yeah, there are people working on various aspects of this, and we've talked to a bunch of the vendors. One group is working on how to deal with the credit rating issue, which can be a problem for low-income residents. Another is working on the potential problem of having to sign 20-year agreements. Another is actually working on how to finance the upfront costs. A residential system can cost $15,000 up front, which is a barrier for a lot of low and moderate income families. So pieces of this are being worked on to try and commercialize the entrance of low-income residents into the ownership part of this. And there are other models for community share, too, where, people can buy a panel a specific panel in a solar farm, or they can own an equity stake, and the prices of entry are much, much lower. So there are other sort of equity-based models to help low and moderate income, or frankly anybody, to get into the solar power transformation. We have some information about that if anyone's interested.
Thanks, Andy. This is Cammie from MAPC. I'm just going to jump into the question that I have for all of our speakers, for Cadmus and for you guys out in Newton, about scale. I mean, obviously, this is such an innovative project, and you have set the precedent, and we're really excited to see how we can help other communities to follow your lead. And I'm wondering, since the example that you guys have where you've started here, it's a relatively good size solar canopy, and it's fortunate that you had that space available in that size project to do this with, where, you know, it equated to about, I think you said, 660,000 or so kilowatt hours a year, which allowed the city of Newton to take a good amount and to have a good amount left then to divide up among those 903 accounts. I'm wondering if you guys in Newton had a sense, or if Cadmus, you have a sense of you know, if it's possible to scale this down into around what size could still be viable for a community that might have a space, whether it's a solar parking canopy or on, you know, a rooftop or otherwise, you know, could we do this with something that's 300 kilowatt size project, something that's smaller than that even? Does it really need to be up probably around that 500 kW or bigger? I don't know if that is something that you guys contended with out in Newton, if you saw if this size really was the lowest workable size, or if it could have gone smaller, if there are any thoughts on that. But with, you know, space at such a minimum, especially in, you know, in our region and many of the urban areas around, I'm curious to hear what thoughts are on that scale question.
Well, this is embarrassing to say, but I was sort of a little bit surprised when the head of ABCD said to us that a $50 a year benefit would be huge for their clients. And I was led to believe that a $20 a year benefit would be significant. So you can do this at a much smaller scale than we did it. We just happened to have a number of projects, and we had our choice of one to use, which we could do it all with one from one array. We could have pooled some arrays, so we could have set up Schedule Zs for 3 small arrays and put them together, and we could have done it with a smaller array. What's exciting to me about this is so easy to do that I'm hoping this becomes a no-brainer for the private sector to be willing to contribute to this program. And I think that will really change the world. If we can get some of the commercial enterprises or the academic enterprises or the houses of worship to start filling out these Schedule Zs and contributing 10% of their net metering credits, you know, it can be a small amount. I think there is some very small limit on what Eversource will do. I don't think they'll go under a certain amount of net metering credit value, but it's a very low number. So this can conceivably be, you know, this can be done with much smaller arrays and with much lower percentages of the net metering credits from any array. And it's conceivable to link arrays, so that if, you know, Temple Beth Elohim and, you know, Sacred Heart want to put their solar arrays together for this purpose of virtual net metering to low-income people, they can do it.
Yeah, and Andy also, this is Greg, Andy brings up a really good point about compiling projects between both the public side and some of your neighborhood places of worship and private landowners. I would also say that there's an opportunity to pair with neighboring municipalities and create joint solicitation efforts with municipalities in your load zone. I mean, we deal with a lot of very densely populated communities where there's not a lot of open land, and the open land that's available often has many sets of eyes on it. So If you work with neighboring municipalities through an organization like MAPC or some of your local networks, there are opportunities to take wider looks at, regional facility portfolios and regional site portfolios and put together a reasonably attractive package for third-party development that can then be extended to low to moderate income in the fashion that Newton explained and has proven to be effective. So I think there's a lot of room for creativity there, and since Newton sort of already provided a proof of concept, I think it's up to communities to look into things like that if they don't think they can make it work within their own community.
And the program offers a lot of flexibility for how you do this.
Yeah, I think one of our attendees gave a good comment on kind of why this model is such a great one to get started with, about how it gives more bang for your buck, so you can do this and translate the benefits pretty easily to your low-income residents. We're just at the hour, so we got to most of your questions, but if you had a particular question for either Greg or Dave with Cadmus or Andy and Bill at City of Newton, we have their contact information up on the slide, so you should feel free to reach out to them with your specific questions or follow up with Cami or I if you have questions about how MAPC might help you implement one of these models. So thank you so much to all of our presenters for helping us put together this webinar, and for everyone for calling in and listening with us.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Do I have any links?
You may, but there's none.
Oh, thank you.
Pick the box.